So now we can get going. All
I'm
right.
gonna fix my video. Excuse me for a while. I'm fixing my video.
Okay. A nice picture, though. All right. Let me just start by getting the... Okay, and let me position this. Give me one moment, please. All right, there we go. Very good. Okay. Well, as you can see on our screen there, hopefully it's clear. Everyone can see, right? On the Word document I have opened. Everyone can see it. Okay. All right. Well, let's just remind ourselves kind of where we're at here. We're, of course, been looking at Psalm 99 as an example passage to walk through together, doing each of the steps. And let's remind ourselves of the 4 steps of poetic analysis. Can read and observe, which we've done for Psalm 99, and then identify the setting and the structure. Again, who can tell me what the setting is for a poem? What is that? What is the setting? Anybody tell me? John, how about you? The setting? When we say setting of a poem, what are we talking about?
The background, who wrote it, the recipient.
Location.
Okay, good. Who wrote it? Who was it written to? Maybe when? Locations, any places that are mentioned? Other people that are mentioned? Okay, good. So just sort of background, what prompted the poem to be written?
And occasion.
Yeah, the occasion. Very good. And then also in that second step, we also identify the structure, and by that I meant identify the stanzas or the outline of the poem, and we've done that as well for Psalm 99. The third step is to examine the parallelism, and we've been spending time on that last week, looking at the parallelism, and we'll be doing that, picking up with that step on this psalm in a few minutes. And then the fourth step, which maybe we'll get to the beginning of today, we'll see how it goes, but the fourth step is the imagery and the poetic devices. We'll dive into those as well if we get time for today. Okay, so far in our exegesis of Psalm 99, as I've said, we've done a reading and observations, and I posted those on our group chat. And then the structure and the setting, let's again remember the setting. This was a psalm written for the people of Israel, a call to temple worship, and it was written to bid the worshipers to exalt Yahweh. And in fact, why don't we go ahead and read this psalm together again, okay? So let me pull up the... Give me 1 second to pull up the passage, and then I'll have a few of us read it together, okay? Having a little trouble here. Oh, here we go. Okay. Let us find... There it is. Okay, so here's Psalm 99. You should be able to see it on your screens. I'm going to ask a few of you men to read for me. Let's see. Celito, can you read verses 1 through 3? And then Kent, can you read 4 through 6? And
Yes.
then William, can you read 7 through 9? Okay, Brother Celito, can you read verses 1 through 3? Can you see it okay? Oh, I think his, we can't hear you, brother. Is your audio?
Mute. Mute yung audio.
I think his microphone's having some problems. Oh, still can't hear you.
Uh,
Okay, I'll have somebody else read then. No problem. Sorry about that. Let's see. Jesse, can you hear me? Can you read verses 1 to 3?
Yes. Yes, Pastor. Psalm 99, verse 1. The Lord reigns, let the peoples tremble. He is enthroned above the cherubim, let the earth shake. The Lord is great in Zion, and he is exalted above all the peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is he.
Thank you. Now verses 4 to 6.
the strength of the king loves justice. You have established equity. You have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his footstool. Holy is he. Moses and Aaron were among his priests, and Samuel was among those who called on his name. He called upon the Lord, and he answered them.
And then verses 7 through 9. William, are you on? Oh, maybe not. Jason, why don't you go ahead and read those three then? Verses 7 through 9.
Verse 7, he spoke to them in the pillar of cloud. He kept his testimonies and his statutes he gave them. Lord our God, you answered them. You were forgiving God, and yet the avenger of their evil. Exalt the Lord our God, worship at his holy hill, for holy is the Lord our God.
All right, very good. Thank you. So that's the psalm we've been working on together. And we've talked about from the psalm, the background context here. Again, as I already mentioned, notice it talked about calling worshipers to exalt Yahweh, worship at his holy hill. It talked about his footstool. So this seems to be a psalm that's focusing attention on the people of Israel to come and worship God at the temple with a specific focus on why. And notice there's that repetition 3 times. Holy is he, holy is he, holy is Yahweh our God. And so that provides sort of the background, the occasion for the poem. And then we talked about the type of psalm, an enthronement psalm, which focuses on the sovereign rule of God. And then the outline we've discussed already. And again, those are in notes that I've posted for you guys. And from there, the third step, these are the first 2 steps: read and observe, identify the setting and the structure. And then we go to the third step, which is examine the parallelism used in each verse. And again, I remind you that in the Psalms and Proverbs, parallelism is used quite extensively, quite a lot. When you go to other places that are poetic texts, such as the prophets, it is poetry, but parallelism is not as common. So don't assume that it's always in every verse. Sometimes you won't find it, but you should find it in most passages in Psalms or in the Proverbs. Okay, and so let's remind ourselves the 3 steps when we're doing the parallelism analysis. You guys remember, what are the 3 steps to that analysis? What's the first thing that we want to do? What did we do last week? When you have the poem, you want to examine the parallelism. What do we do first? Anyone remember?
We want to find out what is the parallelism in Hebrew poetry, like in their expression or emotion.
We want to identify the parallelism, but there's a step we do right before that. When we look at each verse, there's something about each verse that we need to do first.
The number of the lines, tricola
Yeah.
or bicola.
Identify how many lines are within each verse. And then we'll look at the parallelism between those lines. That's the second step, is then to identify the type of parallelism between each line. And then the third step is basically to compare the parallelism used throughout the poem. And we'll talk about that when we get to it. So last week, we went through how many lines were within each verse. So again, remember, How many lines do we see in verse 1? 2 lines.
2 lines.
Okay. And how many in verse 2? 2 lines. Verse 3? 2 lines. But then when we get to verse 4, all the rest of the verses, as you can see, are 3 lines. Okay. And so that may be an intentional pattern. It's not, doesn't have to be, but so for this, within this psalm, the first 3 verses are 2 lines each. And how many, who can tell me that poetic word for 2 lines?
Bicola.
Ah, we have a scholar among us. Bicola. Okay. And then the next
Cola.
6 verses
Coca-Cola.
are 3 lines. Yeah,
Cola.
that's 5 lines.
Cola.
5 lines is Coca-Cola. 3 lines is
Cola.
dry cola. Okay. So this may have been intentional by the author, that he intended to do 3 lines, because remember, verses 1 to 3 form the first stanza. So perhaps he was trying to intentionally distinguish those first 3 verses. We can't know for sure, but that's, you know, that's a possibility. Clearly there's a pattern. The first 3 verses are 2 lines, and then the last 6 verses are 3 lines. Now, last week, we noticed, or I pointed out to you guys, I think one of you had an ESV version, and there was one of the verses that was different. What I show you here, this translation is a New American Standard, okay? And notice in verse 4, there are 3 lines. But when we read the ESV, let's see if I put it there. Yeah, there we go. Notice the ESV has 4 lines. So ESV is Coca-Cola on this one. The NAS was Tricola.
Coca-Cola.
That's Coca-Cola is more than 3 lines, basically. Joke lang. But the New King James, we also looked at that. It also had 3 lines. And so the question came up, how do we know which one's correct? Why is there a difference? We know from Hebrew poetry that there is an intention by the author, like I said, particularly in the Psalms and Proverbs, there is an intention by the author to use parallelism. And so there is intention by the author, the poet, to have distinct lines within his poem. The question is, how do we determine what those lines are? We have to rely on the translation that we have. So when we use the NAS, the New American Standard, again, it showed 2 lines for the first 3 verses, 3 lines for the last 3. The ESV matched the New American Standard except for verse 4, where it shows 4 lines. And so the question is, well, why did they change? Why did they do it differently? Well, what I wanted to do is, we're going to dive a little deep this morning. I'm going to show you something more advanced. We didn't look at this in class, but I thought I would at least expose this to you. Some of you may be interested in it. Some of you, it may be boring. I don't know. Some of you may not care, but I just wanted to take a few minutes because I want to show you how the translations determine the number of lines. And they do that if they're paying attention. How do we determine which translation is correct? Is it 3 lines or is it 4? Well, to do that, we're going to need to examine the accents that are in the Hebrew manuscript. So let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, and if you guys have any questions on this, get my attention so that I can answer them for you. All right, you guys ready to dive deep here? Here it comes. Okay, some Hebrew. You guys ready to study some Hebrew together? Some of you are. Oh boy. Okay, let me try to. This is basically an interlinear representation. Can you? This is the Hebrew text for verse 1. Can everybody see that? Hopefully it's big enough. I'll try to expand it a little more. Now above. Oh, see if I do that though. Yeah, that's okay. Now above the Hebrew word, I've written the literal translation in English. So notice, and remember, Hebrew is read right to left. So if we look at the Hebrew here, we have Yahweh, and this is the verb next to it, reigns. He reigns. And then this is the verb, let them tremble.
Let's shake.
Let them tremble, let them shake, shiver. And then the next word is people. So can you guys see above, I have above the word, above the Hebrew word, the literal translation. Okay, you guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is normal. If you go to BibleHub.com, you can look up interlinear. You'll see something like this. Is there a question? Okay, I thought I heard something. Okay, well now, notice something here. I've circled a couple of things. These are, notice there's lots of little dots and symbols and things all around, okay? The main Hebrew text, if you open up a ancient Hebrew Bible, all you would see would be these consonants, these big letters. All these little letters below, like this one here is a vowel. Oops, sorry, I'm having trouble. I'll just zoom in. You see this little mark here? That's a vowel, okay? This little mark here, that 2 dots, is called a shavah. This little mark here is another vowel. It's called a hirig. All right? There's simply vowels that the Masoretes, the copiers of the Hebrew Bible, put in so that we would know how to pronounce this. So these 2 vowels here that looks like a T has a ah sound. So this word is actually pronounced malak because it has an ah sound. This is a meme, M sound, L sound, and a K sound. So this word is malak. All right? So malak. That means, actually, the noun form of that word is melech, which means, melech is king in Hebrew. Malak is the verb form, which means to rule, to reign. Okay? And so that verb means he reigns. Now, there are a few. Okay. Can we have everybody make sure they're muted here? Okay. All right. Now notice as well, I've circled a couple of these marks. These marks are what are called Hebrew accent. The Masoretes, the men who were responsible for copying the Old Testament, they not only put the vowels in to help us know how to pronounce these words, but also they put in the accent marks based on their study and the text they received. Those accent marks have 2 functions, at least 2 that I'm aware of. One is that they tell you where to stress when you pronounce the word. So this word, the word that means peoples here, is amim, amim, okay? And we stress, we stress the second syllable, meme here, because of that accent mark. Okay, see that little, it looks kind of like a, I don't know, a triangle or a hat. Can you guys see that? It's pretty small. Okay, so that accent mark first tells us, if we're reading it, where to emphasize, but also it tells us something very important, especially for Hebrew poetry. It tells us where to divide the line. Okay, so in Hebrew poetry, they are called disjunctive accents, meaning dividing accents. And so what that accent tells us is actually we divide the line here. The Masoretes, those who were the original copiers or the copiers of the Old Testament scriptures after the days of Christ, they identified these accent marks, and that tells us where to divide the passage. And I circled this one in thick red because that's what's called a major accent. Okay, so for example, in this passage, notice Yahweh reigns, let the peoples tremble. And then we have this accent, and that's why there's a division now at the end. That line ends there. You see it? It ends after this first line, which includes these words. And then there's a break because of that accent. Okay? I'll talk about this other accent here, this dotted one, in a minute. Okay?
Clap your feet, clap your feet.
What is that? Okay.
Nursery.
All right. Now, let's look at verse 2. You guys see, again, here's the literal words up above. Yahweh in Zion, great and exalted. Yahweh is great in Zion, and exalted is he above all the peoples. All right? Now, notice, you see again that top hat kind of accent mark? So what's that mean? That's where the first division is. And notice that's exactly what the translation did. The Lord is great in Zion. That's what these 3 Hebrew words translate as. And then we have a break. And then the second line. And exalted is he above all the peoples. Okay? Now notice we also have this, what's called a minor accent that I'll talk about in a minute. But the major accents so far, notice it's where the verse is divided. That's what the translator, if he's paying attention, notices that, oh, okay, after this first sentence, that's where I put in my break. And that's exactly what they did. Okay? We see that in verse 2 as well. Yahweh is great in Zion. And then there's a break. And notice that's exactly what the New American Standard and the ESV and the New King James does. Okay? I'll talk about this chiasm later. All right, let's look at verse 3. Now here, we don't have one of these top hats. There's another accent. It's not as common. It's not as significant or major as the top hat. It's called a revia, basically. But it also serves as a divider. So notice here, let them praise your name. Great and awesome. Holy is he. So let them praise your great and awesome name. And then notice, do you see that in purple there? I'll expand it a little bit. You guys see that?
Yeah.
There's another accent mark. And so that is where it's divided. And let's look and see what the translation did. If I can shrink it down enough here. Let them praise your great and awesome name. That's what they did.
Holy is
And
he.
then divider, holy is he. Next line. Okay?
Yes.
Now, I think if I remember correctly, there's 7, 8, or 9 accent marks. And I don't remember why they have different ones, but some are considered major and some are considered minor. Notice in verse 4. This is the verse that had some differences. Notice there's our hat, top hat one, so we know one of the dividers is here. And then another major accent is this one. Can you guys see that? It's like a less than sign. That's also a major accent mark in Hebrew poetry. And so it also is a divider. All right? So we have, and then we have this minor accent mark down here, which I'll talk about in a minute. So the New American Standard and the ESV take this first line, strength of the king loves justice, and then a break. And then you yourself, I think I've got the lines mixed up here. Have established uprightness. You have executed justice. Oh, I missed the verb here. That's why. This should be established. Okay. All right. So notice that the first line, the strength of the king loves justice. There's our accent mark. So that's why we, after that word, loves justice, there's the first line from the NAS, okay? And then notice, this is a pronoun yourself or you yourself have established uprightness. And then there's that top hat that we saw. So that tells us, okay, there's another major accent that makes a second line here. And now, the third line. Now this is what happened. Well, the New American Standard, again, this is this dotted this dotted circle here, red circle, that is considered an accent mark, but it is typically not a divider. Okay, it's an accent, so it tells us this word. This is the word for righteousness, zedekah, zedekah. So we put emphasis on the last syllable, zedekah, because the accent is there. But this accent sometimes is a divider, but not usually. And what the ESV did was if we go down to the ESV, they broke it here, like New American Standard. They broke it here, like the New American Standard. But then they also broke it here. Because they said,
have the same word.
they interpreted this as a dividing line.
Mm.
Now, why they did that, I don't know. So notice, to make sure we're clear. So this first line is, the strength of the king loves justice. Okay, that's the English translation down there. And then we have the break. And then you yourself have established equity or uprightness. Another break, that's the second line. And then the ESV took this as the third line, justice and righteousness you have executed. And then the fourth line. But notice why they did this, I'm not sure, because if you go up to the first verse, there's that minor accent here, but the ESV
Yes.
did not divide it.
Did not break.
Yes.
And if you look at verse 2, it's the same thing. We see that minor accent again, but the ESV did not divide it. They followed the other versions and did 2 lines. So they did that correctly for those 2 verses, but why they chose to put a fourth line in verse 4, I'm not sure. All I'm doing here is explaining, though, how it happened. All right? If they're paying attention, the translators will be also not only translating these words, but they'll also be looking at these accent marks to determine where to divide the lines. And so in this case, we have these strong dividers indicated by the solid red circles, and then this weak accent here, which they chose or interpreted as also a division. But I think that was not correct. And the New American Standard and the New King James support that. They did not see this as a major division, so they did not put in a fourth line here. Okay? How are we doing? Does this make any sense?
Yes.
Little bit?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Now, in class, I didn't go through this because you guys don't need to go find the Hebrew text and then figure out where the lines are. All right. You can if you want. You can go to if you can find a good Hebrew text, but we can really trust our English translations, especially New American Standard, New King James, and ESV. If you use those together, normally they will agree, and where they don't, just pick the versions that the 2 out of 3. So like in this case, if we didn't look at any of the Hebrew accents and we just had the ESV, the New American Standard, and New King James, remember the New King James and the New American Standard both had 3 lines. So my recommendation is just take the majority. So if 2 out of the 3 versions do it one way, follow that. All right. And normally, New King James, New American Standard, and ESV is usually pretty good, but in this case, they added that fourth line. Let me just show you verse 5, and then we'll go back to, now verse 5, again, we don't see any of these major markers, accent markers, but we do see one that's a little, it's that revia again. We see that like we did back in verse 3. So here, those are serving as not only accents, but also the disjunctive markers, meaning that's where the line divides. So the first line will be, this is the verb for exalt. It's the command, exalt Yahweh our God. Notice that is the first line. And there's a division here because we have this Hebrew accent. Second line is, and worship at the stool, the stool of his foot, literally. Worship at his footstool. That's the second line. And then we have Kadosh, the holy is he. Okay, this is the word for holy, and then is he. And that's our third line. Okay, so that's how the translators do it. They just look at the Hebrew text and they look for these accent marks, and then they take the major accent marks and understand those to be the divisions within the verse. Okay,
Okay.
that's how they do it.
Okay.
All right, so that was all free bonus material, but I just wanted to show you why there was a difference in the number of lines, because in Hebrew poetry, it's important that we get the lines correct, because if we're going to understand the parallelism, we have to know, okay, what is the first line? What is the second line? Is there a third line or a fourth? Okay, and so I'll include these in the notes. You guys can look over. Again, this is advanced for your study. You don't have to go to the Hebrew text and try to figure this out. Sometimes it can get very confusing because, like I said, there are 7, 8, or 9 different accents. But normally the ones you will see, the most common accents you will see, the most common is this one. And the next most common is this one. And then I think the third most common is that diamond called the revia, this one. Okay? After that, there are other accents like this one, which is a revia, but also notice there's another little line here. Okay? So this can get very confusing, as you can see. But I at least wanted you to understand where some of this has come from. All right, are there any questions on this? Again, this is extra. You don't have to do this for your normal process. All you need to do is just take the English translations, and if there's a difference, in the number of lines, just take the 2 out of the 3 that match. Okay, and that, I think, for 95% of what we do here, you'll be fine. You don't have to worry about these Hebrew text and all that. But are there any questions on this?
No.
None.
Okay. All right. Ready to move on. All right. Okay. Let me get back to our other document there. Go back to our session notes. Okay. And so how do we determine which translation is correct? Again, just take 2 out of the 3. Take the number of lines where 2 out of the 3 translations, and by this I take the most solid ones. I think these are the best English translations for the Hebrew Bible, especially. Take the 2 out of the 3 translations where they agree.
Match.
All right. And in this case, if you remember, for this particular issue, the New American Standard and the King James agreed, and we went back and looked at the Hebrew and the accents, and looking at the Hebrew accents indicates they were correct. Okay. All right. some advanced Hebrew. You guys are going to be Hebrew scholars after this session is done. All right. Now, so that just covers the number of lines. And again, verses 1 to 3 were 2 lines each,
Yeah.
bicola.
Yes.
And then verses 4 to 9 were 3 lines each, tricola. Okay. And we confirmed verse 4.
Yeah.
Verse 4 is tricola as well. Okay. Now, the next step in parallelism analysis is to actually now look at the parallelism, identify the parallelism being used
Okay na kada.
between each line. Let us remember, brothers, what are the 5 types of parallelism that we looked at, considered? You guys should have these memorized by now, right? What's the first one? What kind of parallelism? It's most common?
Synonymous.
Synonymous. Or line 2 is synonymous, says the same thing as line 1. What's the next one?
Contrastive.
Contrasting.
Okay, good. Where second line contrasts the first. All right, and then the third category.
Developmental.
Okay, and that one is a little bit more complicated because it has the
Addition.
3 types.
the 3 types of
Developmental parallelism.
okay. Let me do this. All right, it had the 3 types, which were what?
Expansion.
Expand,
Expansion.
Or addition.
Addition.
expand or add, addition,
Explanation or
explanation, good.
or
Or we can say
illustration.
illustration, same thing.
Or reason or purpose or result.
Okay, and then the last one was purpose or reason
Or result.
or result. Okay, and then we had, of course, our favorite one,
Ambut.
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 It's our favorite one, and then a special form of either synonymous or contrastive is a chiasm.
Yes.
Okay,
Chiasm.
where the second line is in reverse order grammatically compared to the first. Okay, so now
Yes.
we went through a number of examples last week together from Proverbs. Now let's dive into Psalm 99, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to choose one of you, and as we go, and then you just tell us what kind of parallelism you see there. Okay, let me do this. Okay. Let's see. Joshua, you want to take a run at the first one here? We have 2 lines, so it's going to be line 1 and line 2. What kind of parallelism do we see here?
Synonymous?
Synonymous? You didn't sound confident there.
Yeah,
You
that's
guys
fine.
agree, synonymous? Umbut? No, not umbut. Yeah, notice. Let's take a look here. This is an interesting form. It's got actually 2 phrases within each line. So we have the Lord reigns. Now notice the second line, he is enthroned.
Yes.
That's essentially saying the same thing, right? The Lord, he reigns, is enthroned. Now, it added the cherubim, but that's okay. It's still synonymous. And notice there's a second statement. Let the peoples tremble. Let the,
Earth shake.
yeah, that's the same idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
So this is synonymous. All right, very good. So we'll, let's do this. All right. Let's do verse 2. And we'll have Eric, why don't you try verse 2. What kind of parallelism does it look like here? Developmental, is that what you said? What kind?
Expand.
Okay. What do you guys think?
Illustrates.
You think it's developmental? Now we have that word and here. Remember I told you, be careful with these conjunctions. Sometimes they might mislead you. The word and might seem to indicate an expansion or adding, but let's look at this again carefully. The Lord,
Is great in Zion.
He,
Zion. Synonymous.
yeah, let's take a look. Is great. And then next, look at this line, is exalted. Notice those are the same idea, isn't it? In Zion, which is a location, and above all the peoples, which is also a location. All right? So this seems to be, I think, synonymous, because it's, look how close it is. Again, same subject, the same verb, and then it tells a location. All right? So it does seem to be adding information, but notice the way it adds the information is actually a similar statement. He's saying the same thing basically, except one difference is in the first line he says in Zion, and the second line he says above all the peoples. And because this seems to be synonymous, that's probably indicating all the peoples in Zion, all those who've gathered to worship. Okay? But do you see how synonymous, I think, makes more sense here? Guys have any questions? Eric, does that make sense to you, or?
Yes, yes.
Okay, you can disagree, it's okay. All right, so far, synonymous. Let's look at verse 3, and Macdon, let's go ahead and have you give a try for verse 3. What do you think?
Developmental.
Okay. Developmental. What kind?
Illustration.
Okay. Illustration question mark. What was the second? What did you just say?
Result or reason.
Now that's interesting.
Reason. What's purpose?
Yeah. What? All right. Who said that? Who said that? It's reason.
Kent.
Kent. Why would you say that, Kent?
It's it's reason to praise the Lord because of His holiness.
Yeah. Line 2 gives the reason for line 1, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Clearly, it's not synonymous, right? We don't have, let them sing to your great person. Okay, it's a different statement being made, but in parallelism we're trying to understand, okay, what's the connection between these two statements? All right, we know in Hebrew poetry that the poets, they write in each verse, one or two or three or four lines, and those lines are intended to be connected in some way. And so here we see the connection is not a synonymous or contrastive parallelism. So what's the connection? Line 2 seems to be giving the reason for line 1. Why should we let them praise your great and awesome name? Because He's holy. So it's almost like we're saying this. Okay? That's how we're seeing it, I think. So
Or 4.
Very good, Kent. Good insight.
Or 4. For holy is He.
Or 4, yeah. Yeah, you could say, for holy is He. Okay? That's what seems to be the connection between these two lines. All right. Very good. Any questions on that? Does that make sense, everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, what we're doing here, again, this is interpretive, all right? But we're having to try to make decisions of how are these lines connected to each other, all right? And so we're examining, you know, parallelism, and our understanding of parallelism is what is guiding us in terms of trying to understand or figure out how are these lines connected to each other, all right? Now, verse 4 introduces a little bit of a wrinkle because we have 3 lines to deal with now. And when you have 3 lines, sometimes the parallelism is a little more complicated. It's a little more involved. And so we're going to have our Hebrew scholar, Jason, work on this one. Verse 4. How do you see these lines connected? What's the parallelism here? And again, remember, parallelism could occur between lines 1 and 2, or lines 2 and 3, or sometimes there's parallelism between the first line and then the second and third line combined. All right, so this is a little more complicated, but what do you see here, Jason?
I think my answer that is synonymous.
Okay, if we look at just the first line and the second, all right?
Yeah.
Do these 2 lines appear to be synonymous?
No.
They're pretty different, aren't they? So
Yes.
how would you see the second developmental? In what way?
Illustration.
Wow.
Rex was taking over
X
there.
is present.
Rex is here.
Yeah.
What did you say, Jason? I didn't catch.
Addition.
What kind of developmental?
Addition.
Addition or expansion, yeah. Okay, that's line 2 adds to line 1. Okay, now what about, is there any relationship between lines 2 and 3?
Synonymous.
That is synonymous, right? You have, or you, okay? And then we have established.
Same. Executed.
Okay, and that is, you have executed. All right, and then we have what has been established.
Equity and justice.
And then what has been executed. See that? So synonymous line 2 with line 3. Okay? Now, really, then lines 2 and 3 are actually expanding upon line 1, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
So we could say actually lines,
Line
sorry,
2 and 3 expanded.
lines 2 and 3.
Adds line 1.
I'll just do this.
And
Lines
line
2 and
2
3 add to line 1.
Can it be illustration, Pastor? Line 2 and 3 illustrates past line 1.
So
how he loves justice.
How he loves.
That's how.
Yeah.
That's how he illustrates. Line 2 and 3 illustrates how he loves justice.
That's a good possibility. That it could be line.
It explains how he loves justice, how he executes justice.
Human, the word you.
It illustrates.
You have
2 and 3 illustrates line 1.
Yeah. Let me think about that, but that might be a better a more accurate explanation. Yeah. I think that's a good possibility. It's developmental, definitely. Lines 2 and 3, and then yeah, it could be just the way or how we see the king loves justice. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's probably a stronger possibility. So let me highlight it. All right. So do you guys see how lines 2 and 3 are synonymous,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, it's synonymous.
Okay, those are clearly synonymous with each other. And then the relationship between line 1 and lines 2 and 3 is lines 2 and 3
Illustrates line.
explain or illustrate. And usually I would say explain. Illustrate I use for like when it's a picture that's given.
Yeah.
But okay, good, very good. All right, let's go to verse 5. Are there any questions on verse 4? Okay, verse 5. Let's see. William, you want to try that one? Verse 5.
I think is developmental. It expands, line 2 expands line 1, and line 3 states the purpose of lines 1 and 2.
Okay, and so we also have developmental line 3 or line
Explains lines 1
lines
and 2.
1 and 2.
So line 3 explains 1 and 2.
I'm sorry, line 3 is the reason, right? You said?
Yes.
You said result. Line 3
Yes.
is
The
reason for lines 1 and 2.
Yes, developmental.
Yeah. Okay, good. You see that? Exalt the Lord our God. And then he adds a second command, worship at his footstool. So line 2 is definitely expanding or adding to line 1. And then line 3, the relationship is, line 3 is the reason for lines 1 and 2. Okay, again, we could put in parentheses here the idea. Why should we exalt the Lord our God? Why should we worship at his footstool? Because or for he is holy. Okay? Same thing we saw up above in verse 3. All right, very good. Anyone have questions on that? Okay so far?
Okay.
All right, you guys are doing good. All right, let's look at verse 6. Again, another 3-line verse. Let's see. Narelle, do you want to try this one? Verse 6.
Verse 6. Moses and Aaron were among his priests. Samuel also was among those who called upon his name. They called to the Lord, and he answered. I think this is confusing, but I'll try.
Go for it.
Developmental illustrate.
Okay, which lines? Let's start with lines 1 and 2. What's their relationship?
The line 1 and 2 is
Let's break it down here.
Okay.
If we break up, we have Moses and Aaron, the first line, then we have Samuel in the second, and then
Yes.
notice we're among
his priests.
and notice Samuel was among
His
and
priest
then
also.
his priests. What does that look like to you?
Synonymous.
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 Yeah, synonymous. See that? The
Okay.
subjects, even though they're different people, they're the same idea. Were among, was among, his priests, and then the
Yes.
parallel to that is those who call on his name. Okay, so lines 1 and 2 are synonymous.
Synonymous.
All right. How about line 3?
It's a developmental, I think.
Okay.
Develops the first line and the second line.
How?
Addition.
Purpose.
It adds information.
Result.
It adds information.
Adds formation.
Okay, I've heard several. I've heard expansion or adds. I've heard
That's the reason.
illustrate, and I've heard result. And
Yeah,
so
result.
we
That's the
gotta,
reason.
let's think about this. Is this, they were among those who called on his name. They called upon the Lord. So that's just restating that. But then
Yes.
notice it adds this, doesn't it? And he answered them.
Result.
I think it's
Result.
expansion. It's expansion. It's just
Expansion.
adding on the idea. Moses and Aaron and Samuel called on his name, and then the third line says, and he answered. So that's adding more information.
Pastor Tim, can it be result? Because when they called upon his name, the result of it is he will answer them.
Well, result would be that lines 1 and 2, let's see, so you're saying that line 3, the result,
Called upon the Lord.
is that what you're saying?
Yeah, results in line 1 and 2. And line 3, they called upon the Lord. It's reiterating the fact that they are priests and they are calling on his name. The
Yes.
result of that is he answered them.
Yeah, I'd have to think about that because
if it's expansion, the same subject should be carried out in the result in line 3. They, the priest and Samuel, meaning Moses, Aaron, and Samuel, they called upon the Lord. And the subject here in the second praise in line 3 is God already. So it's the result.
yeah,
Because if it's expansion, the same subject.
doing
supposed to
something
be-
else.
Yeah.
So if
because
it had
it's
said,
different subject already.
so if it had said they called upon the Lord and they cried out fervently, something like that.
Supposedly, it's expansion.
Okay.
So this is result.
But because it's different pronoun already,
Yeah.
meaning it's the result. Other subject does something in response to the action of the first subject.
Yeah,
So it's
I think that's
probably result.
a good argument.
Yeah, because
Good argument.
the second verb is the result of the first verb. The second action was the result of the first action.
The first
Cause and
action
effect.
was acted by the priest and Samuel,
Yes,
and
cause and effect.
the next phrase is action acted by God in
Okay.
answer to them.
Yeah, I think that you make a good point. I think result probably is a better connection.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Give me a second. I gotta get a pen to write something down.
Galing ni Pastor Rex.
Brother Will, kumusta ka na?
Tawag sa mga scholar. Abot ng scholar.
Pastor Rex, your presence is known.
Oh, Pastor Rex.
Okay. Let's see, where are we?
Ay mo gara-gara kay makasabot na ba nag-Bisaya?
Okay. And this is why, this is, it's like with block diagramming, it's really helpful to talk about it with somebody else because, you can see things a certain way, but as you discuss, a lot of times other insights can come out, like Brother Rex was pointing out, and William in the last case. So it is helpful to do these, just like your block diagram. It's helpful to go over it with somebody else, and I think that'll really refine and improve the results. Okay, excellent. All right. Let's see, Brother Jed, are you on? Jed there?
Okay.
Hi, can you do verse 7?
Okay.
Okay, we can start, let's go lines 1 and 2. Do those look like they're synonymous?
Uh,
Notice that the subject's different, right? He and they. Spoke is the verb and kept. So if we were to compare, like we did before, do that. All right, so as we look at these, do we notice, do they seem to be in parallel with each other? Are they synonymous? Notice the pronoun, the subject is different, right? First,
Yes.
he versus they. The verbs are different ideas. Spoke versus kept. And then to them, the object is different too. So these two sentences are different. They're not synonymous. Okay. So if they're not, so what do you think if they're not synonymous?
It's developmental, Pastor Ken.
Developmental.
What do you think, Jed? Does developmentals make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's result.
And then
Line 2 is the result of line 1.
Developmental result.
yeah, line good result. Line 2 is a result of line 1.
Line 1.
You see that?
Yeah.
So it's telling us this is line 2 is telling us what happened as a result of line 1. He spoke to them and they kept his testimonies. Okay. Now, as we compare lines 2 and 3, what kind of parallelism do we see between those two lines?
Seems to be synonymous, but stating that the word and I think it's more on it's developmental. It
Okay.
adds, it expands the information given in line 2.
Okay.
But at first it seems to be synonymous.
It expands. You could say that developmental. But let me show you one thing here. Notice line 3 that there's an elision. What's left out of line 3?
Yeah. They.
So knowing that, I think perhaps lines 2 and 3 actually are synonymous.
Synonymous.
They're saying the same thing in a different way. Okay, they kept his testimonies, they kept the statutes he gave them. Okay, it's the same, he's talking about the same thing. Testimonies and statutes are the same. They're synonymous with each other. So I think lines 2 and 3 actually are synonymous, but it's a little tricky because of the elision, because of these two words the poet did not copy in the third line. Okay, so I would go with synonymous in this case. Okay, so that means line 1, lines 2 and 3 are the result of line 1.
The result of line 1.
Okay.
Jed, does that make sense? Do you have any questions? I gave you a hard one.
okay. Asking me?
Yeah, does that make sense?
Sorry.
Yes. Clear.
Okay.
Follow.
All right. Let's see, verse 8. John, have you done one of these yet? Try verse 8.
Verse 8. I think
line 1 and 2, they're developmental.
Development.
And how? How does
Uh,
line 2 develop line 1?
I'm going with either expands or explain, Pastor Tim.
Explain how God answered.
Or
Yeah, you answered, and then I think expand is the right idea, because and you were forgiving God. You answered and you forgave. So I think you're right. I think expansion makes sense. So we would say line 2 adds to line 1. Okay. How about lines 2 and 3?
Developmental.
line 2 and 3 are developmental. Then still
Contrast.
Well, there isn't a. Okay, so go ahead, John. Finish your thought first.
there's the word and, but it's yeah, contrastive idea. But
The idea is contrastive, but it's not contrastive parallelism, because then it would have said something like it would parallel this line. I think I heard somebody say add.
yeah, I said expand.
Yeah. So here we would put this lines 2 and 3 add to line 1. You answered, you forgave, and you were an avenger. Okay, so I think second and third lines are expanding on the first.
Pastor Ted,
Yeah.
line can line 2 and 3 be an illustration to line 1? How he answered them? Like when God answered them, they forgive them, and they
Yeah,
also
that's what I was
Or
also
an
thinking.
explanation of
More on
yeah.
expansion.
Or
illustration or explanation on how he answered, like that.
So you would
Just
saying
expansion,
this.
because
Lines
the kind
2,
of answer he
how
gave
he
to
answered
them,
them. Pastor Tim.
explanation of
explanation
line
or
1.
illustration, 2 and 3
Explains
to line 1.
Is that what you're saying?
how he answered. Yes.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, okay. 2 and 3 explains how he answered. Yeah.
Yeah, you could probably make a case for that as well.
Because again, the development of the 3 lines are really dependent on line 1.
The first one.
Well,
God answered them by avenging their evil deeds. God answered them by forgiving them, like that.
yeah, like I said, I think you can make a good case for that expansion explanation. Okay, good. All right, good. All right, let's get the last line here. I think we're all getting parallelism fatigue, so let's get the last verse done here.
Pastor Tim,
Yeah, is that you, Jesse?
is there a way to tell the difference between the developmental addition or a decisive?
I'm sorry, say that again. Difference between
Developmental addition and the developmental addition and illustration. I think it's
yeah. Addition simply adds more information, whereas illustration or explanation
modifies that.
Describes how.
Yes.
Or shows how
the action.
Describes the action.
First line happens. Yeah. describes the action.
It's just an expansion. It adds illustration to.
Yeah, I think that this idea of how is an important part of it. How does the first line take place? So, for example, in that one up above.
For me, it's
Yeah, go ahead. Who's that?
I guess the distinction between the two expansion by addition is when you answer the question what else, and illustration is how.
for me,
You
Pastor
answer the
Tim,
question how.
verse 8 is expansion.
Verse 8. Okay, why would you say
Expansion
that?
because of, of who God is. The psalmist, "O Lord our God, you answered them." The attributes, the character of God.
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways to look at this. You could say you answered and you forgave and you avenged. Okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
different ideas.
Or, and I think this was what Rex was pointing out, or you could say you answered by forgiving
and avenging.
and avenging. That's how he answered. Okay, so that's an interpretive decision. All right,
Okay.
and I think you can make a case either way.
Okay.
Just like when we block diagram, right? Sometimes there might be a couple of options and it's not really clear at this point which one it is. So this is just helping us to be asking the right questions and thinking about this. So this is really good.
Pastor Tem,
Yeah.
Pastor Tem, will the punctuation marks really helps?
Yeah.
Because in line 1 there's this semicolon.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. Because
In line 1 in verse 8 there's a semicolon after you had answered them.
Yeah.
And then it continues with line 2, but line 2 and 3 were connected with just comma. So it really helps to really separate line 1 from 2 and 3.
Yeah, and that's why I think line 2 and 3 function together.
Yeah.
Compared to
Against
line 1. Yeah.
Yeah.
However,
so definitely it's not expanding in line 1 is not expanding in line 2 and 3. It's actually 2 and 3 expanding itself and illustrates line 1.
Oops, I'm sorry. I meant to do this. Sorry, I put that in the wrong. Yeah, I think yeah, go ahead, William.
In addition to what Pastor Rex was saying, yeah, if you follow the English language, that would be logical. However, our basis, just like when we first began the lesson, would always be to check if this was how it was originally constructed in the Hebrew language. Am I right, Pastor Tim?
Yeah, the semicolon, all these punctuation marks are just put in by the translator. It's their interpretation, their assumption.
So if you follow the English language regarding the punctuation, Pastor Rex is logically correct.
Yeah.
However, it may not necessarily be so if the Hebrew
with the original manuscript
is not constructed the same way.
Well, all you would see in the original is
the break in the lines.
Yeah, I'll show you. So William, you just want to see the Hebrew again. Wow.
I want to get to the correct basis.
Yeah, if we go to verse 8,
Palaw.
Patay na tayo, Brother Will.
Thomas assignment.
Ikaw naman
Mauna
ang
na nato ni Ron.
Nga lang yung
Mauna ni
paghimo
Ron.
assignment. Nga lang yung paghimo assignment.
Sige na
Tanaw yung mag-Hebrew.
Ako mauna na akong gigamit nga Bible kanang gitunga
Okay.
karon.
Bugata.
All right, so notice verse 8.
Sayop bitaw.
Brother Will, next time don't that talk already, okay? You make it worse.
Sorry.
He likes the Hebrew, so
Yeah.
so notice. Okay, here's that one punctuation mark, that less than sign there. You guys see that?
Yes.
That's the one accent. So we know there's a major division here. That's the word answered.
Answer.
And then the second one is to them. So if we go back to our passage, it's a little bit cumbersome to do this, but we see a strong division between, we see the strong accent mark here. The strongest one's here, and then the second strongest is here. So
Okay.
the translators interpreted
Make
that as,
justice.
that's why they made this a semicolon, because that's a hard break compared to a comma, which is in English a less disruptive pause, if you will. So all that to say this, I think the New American Standard interpreted that 2 and 3 are more tightly connected, and they're doing something to line 1.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so lines 2 and line 1 and so lines 2 and 3 are interconnected,
Explains line 1.
and then they are in relationship to line 1, which we saw up here. Same thing. Notice lines 2 and 3 are interconnected. They're synonymous, and both of them are the result of line 1. And again, notice the translation put a semicolon there.
So
Let's
Pastor
look
Rex
at
was right.
now this one. Look at this, man.
Sabog na Will, sabog Will.
Do you see? Yeah, I know, William. It's your fault.
Mag-Hebrew na po noon na ron.
Look at where the semicolon is on this verse, verse 6. You guys see that? There, the translators are saying lines 1 and 2 are connected, and we saw that, right? They're synonymous, and that line 3 by itself is the result of lines 1 and 2. So do you see what they're doing with the semicolon?
Yes.
Same thing in verse 5. Lines 1 and 2 are tightly connected, and then line 3 is the reason for lines 1 and 2. So the semicolon in Hebrew poetry, in the New American Standard at least, is telling us sort of where the hard break is and which lines would go together. All right? But again, that's interpretive. That's the New American Standard's interpretation. But that's actually, as we go through the passage, what we've been doing is we've been identifying which two lines are more tightly connected together. So the semicolon seems to be the marker for that in, again, the translation. But William, as you said, going back to the original, and the best we can do is just, and it's pretty subjective, is just see what kind of an accent mark is there. Is it a strong disjunctive, a strong break, or a weaker one? And that's, you know, it's hard to make a solid case for that, but at least we see in verse 8 that the semicolon seems to be following the strength of the accent mark or the divider mark in the Hebrew. Okay, so the New American Standard would seem to have identified this correctly, where this have line 1 and then line 2 and 3 are more tightly connected to each other, and they then are lines 2 and 3, in this case, either add to line 1 or explain line 1, depending on
the interpretation,
which way you go. Yeah, either one of those I think you can make a case for. So, and it's fine to put both. If you're not sure, just put lines 2 and 3 either expand on line 1 or they explain line 1. All right, and then you can figure it out later as you get more familiar with the psalm. Okay. So that was Brother William's fault. That's why we went on that side trail. All right.
Sorry.
No, it's a good point, and we always need to remember that you know, punctuation marks, even the words used, right? This is the translations interpretation. So we always want to, that's why when we do word studies, we don't do a word study on the English word, right? We do it on the, try to find the Hebrew word and do the study on that, because that's the original word that was used. All right, but that's for another day. All right, let's do verse 9. Let's see, Brother Ruel, do you want to try this one, verse 9?
Yes. I think it's developmental in the sense that line 1. Am I clear?
Lines 1 and 2.
Hello?
How do those connect?
Yeah, line 1 and 2. Line 2 expands line 1.
Okay, good.
And line 3 soul is the reason. Line 1 and 2.
Yeah, line 3 is the reason. So line 3 would be developmental, reason.
Reason.
So line 3 is the reason for lines 1 and 2. Now, let's check, let's compare, because verse 9 is almost exactly the same as verse 5, right? Verse 5 is exalt the Lord our God, worship at his footstool, holy is he. And that's exactly how we figured it out for verse 5. All right, so good. We're consistent. Okay, so what do we do with all this? All right?
Pastor Ted.
Yes, sir.
Excuse me. Verse 9 and 5. Line
Yes.
1 and 2, can it be synonymous with elation? Exalt the Lord our God, like worship the Lord our God.
Oh.
Exalt the Lord God at his holy hill.
Worship, so you'd be saying
in line 1, yeah.
Yeah, but still we don't have
in line 1 also the place where we worship God. So the Lord our God at his holy hill.
Yeah, you normally don't.
Can it be synonymous?
I think if you have to assume that much has been taken out, it's probably not. All right. Now, if the first line had said, exalt the Lord our God in Zion and worship at his holy hill, that would be synonymous. But I think if you're assuming that something was taken out in verse 1 and then or line 1 and then something else in line 2, that's probably less likely. Okay?
Okay.
All right.
Madto sa taga-Hebrew na, Pastor Rex. Check na pagka-Hebrew.
And the words are actually very different, Rex. Exalt here, and this is, you know, we wouldn't know this until we did word studies, but actually the word exalt has the idea of lift up.
Scribe.
And worship has the idea of bow down. So they're different postures. Again, we wouldn't know that necessarily right now, but this is where later on when you would do a word study and figure out, let's say that you did that. Let's say you said, oh, I think these are synonymous. I think you say, I think line 1 is synonymous with line 2. All right? Because you assume maybe there's elision there. But later, if we did a word study on exalt and lift up, we would find these really aren't synonyms. They're two different ideas. Exalt has the idea of lift up, but worship is the idea of bow low, bow down. So they're both ways that we glorify God, but they're different. You know, the idea of that word worship literally is a lowering. And so it's kind of an interesting contrast. I think it's almost an irony here that we exalt the Lord, we lift him up actually by bowing down. So I think understanding those two words might also reinforce this idea that these are two things he's telling us to do, not synonymous things, but one's adding to the other. All right. But you could at the beginning think, okay, maybe it's synonymous. Maybe, maybe this is implied, at his holy hill. And maybe it's implied worship the Lord our God. But again, I think normally you don't see that much elision. Usually it's just something taken out of one line, not two different things taken out of two lines. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good question though. Really good question. Okay, so what do we do with all this? Okay, and I summarized here. Now I didn't add in, a few of your guys had some good suggestions here on, let me see, maybe I can modify it right now. Verse 6. Verse 6 was result. 3 is a result. Okay, and then verse 8. Again, explanation. So what I'll do is I'll take the third step is compare the types of parallelism used within the poem and note any patterns. Okay. So what I'll do is sort of look at, these are all the parallelisms from all 8 verses here. And usually I'll just see is there any pattern here. Now the first 2 are synonymous. Verse 6 is synonymous. Second line of verse 7. But don't really see a pattern. But what do we notice here about what is the most common form of parallelism that the author uses here in this psalm? Developmental, right?
Developmental.
Yeah. In fact, if you look at it, of the 15 lines which show parallelism here, 5 are synonymous and 10 are developmental. Okay. And of those, I think we had 5 are purpose, result, and 5 are expansion. I may have gotten the numbers off a little bit here, but clearly most of the psalm is developmental. So that's telling us that most of the psalm is developmental, has this idea of instruction often. All right, so it's telling the type of parallelism he's using is consistent with the instructive nature of the poem. Throughout the poem, he's telling us something about God and then calling us to respond to those truths. So that's kind of what I would say as far as trying to look at all these together. I don't know, do you guys have any other thoughts or comments about it? Anything come to mind?
Actually, quite similar to how you said it. Based on this psalm, its instruction is based on an illustration of what, or describing what the Israelites did, or what they should do, or what they should be doing, as compared to what we should be doing, or as an example of what we should do.
Yeah. Okay, and we can see that in the type of parallelism that is used. So that's one thing. The other is, as we go through each of these lines and the verses, the parallelism, this analysis just helps us try to interpret, understand better the relationship within each of the verses. When we later on, we will block diagram this psalm, and that will help us understand the relationship between verses. Parallelism helps focus us on the relationship within the verse. The diagram, structural diagram, will help us see the relationship between the verses. Okay, so this is one of the steps in the process. The third step in the poetic analysis. Again, the first step is to read and observe. Read the poem several times, make observations. The second step is to identify the background, the setting of the poem, and also its structure, the stanzas. And then the third step is to examine the parallelism within each verse. Okay? And so to examine the parallelism, again, let me remind you of the 3 steps to do that. And then we'll is identify how many lines within each verse. Again, because sometimes there may be a difference between translations, so we want to make sure we are accurate in how many lines there are between or within each verse. And then we do the parallelism of each of those lines within each verse. And then finally, step back, look at the type of parallelism used throughout the poem, just see if there's any patterns. You know, sometimes you'll have a poem that has all of one type of parallelism, but then one verse is different. Like you may have a poem where all of it's developmental, but one verse is synonymous. Or, for example, in Psalm 51, most of those verses are chiasms. And then there's 1 or 2 verses that are different. So sometimes that different parallelism may be intended by the author to draw attention to that particular verse that's different. So that's why I bring this up. It's not always like that, but sometimes the author will use a difference in parallelism to draw something out or focus attention on something. It appears here in Psalm 99. I don't think there's that type of pattern, but we do see in Psalm 99 the dominant form of parallelism is developmental, which is consistent with sort of the instructive nature of the psalm and the exhorting nature of the psalm, the call to exalt, the call to worship, and then the reasons for that. So that's, I think, all that we need to do right now at this point for parallelism and that analysis. Are there any thoughts or questions, men? I know this is this can be, yes.
You've mentioned in Psalms 99. Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
In this Psalms, the dominant parallelism is developmental, and you mentioned that by nature, it's more, the emphasis is more on instructions. How about in other Psalms where we could not locate a clear pattern, but the dominant parallelism is synonymous? What does it imply?
Yeah, good question. Synonymous, you know, has the idea of repetition, right? When you're saying synonym, right, means it's a different word but the same idea. Synonymous parallelism is, you know, different words might be used, but they're conveying the same meaning or the same point. So if you have a poem that's full of synonymous parallelism, there's a lot of repetition that's going on, and repetition usually points to emphasis. So you kind of have to see the nature of the poem. And I'm trying to think right now if any that fit that pattern. Psalm 51 has a lot of synonymous, but they're chiasms. And the chiasm actually is, if you see a lot of chiasms, that normally is more for emphasis, so that's more emotion. And what's interesting in Psalm 51 is it's a very emotional poem, right? I mean, David's pouring out his heart, and he's in anguish, longing for God to forgive him and to accept him, receive him. And so chiasms make sense because those are, you know, a way to express emphasis, which is exactly what matches the tone of that poem. So, you know, and in the Proverbs, we see a lot of contrastive parallelism that's used because that's also consistent with wisdom literature, and sort of you make a point by contrasting 2 things. And so we'll see a lot of contrastive parallelism in the Proverbs.
Yes.
Okay. Now,
One more thing, Pastor Tin.
Yes.
You mentioned that the main reason for having too much repetitions or the usage of the synonymous parallelism is because of the emphasis, right?
Yeah. It can tend to have that.
So in this Psalm 99, this would explain why 3 or actually 4 out of 5 synonymous parallel lines pertain to or point out to God or describe God or God's action, because it really puts emphasis primarily on God. Because out of the
Yeah.
15 lines, 5 are synonymous, and 4 out of those 5 refer to God or God's action.
Okay. Yeah, let's take a quick look at that, and then we'll, let's see. Let me share. That's a interesting insight. If I can get back to.
Because outside of those 5, one synonymous lines out of those 5 is the mention of the prophets when they called out to him. But
Yeah,
4,
so verse 1 is synonymous. Verse 2 is synonymous.
Synonymous.
Okay. Verse 4,
4.
these
synonymous.
second and third lines are synonymous with each other. And
God's
then verse
action.
6. So you're saying, and then verse 7, those two are synonymous.
Yes.
But in the first 2 lines, you say the focus is on the Lord, right? Is that what your
Yes.
point was?
Yes.
And then also in verse 4.
Yes.
Okay.
Or the Lord or the Lord's action.
Okay, yeah, there might be something to that. That's a good observation. I mean, that's the kind of thing you'd want to put in that third step of the parallelism analysis. You say that there are, 4 or 5 synonymous examples of synonymous parallelism here, and in 3 of those, the focus is on the Lord. So that would be something to take note of in your analysis. Okay, good observation. All right. Anything else, men?
Pastor Tim,
Yes.
when it comes to the book of Job, it has poetry from verse 3 to chapter 3 to chapter 41. So how should we deal with it? It has very long conversations. There is a form of poetry. So what is the best way for us to somehow get a glimpse of it and will be able to preach it?
Yeah, you would need to break it down by its major sections. For example, in Job, it's a dialogue, right? So you would break it down between, what Job says, what, Zophar says, what Bildad says, what Elihu says, each of those segments in the dialogue. And then within their segment, let's say you're in one of Job's statements, then there would be stanzas within that. You'd have to identify the structure of what he said. Then say Bildad responds. So he may respond with 2 or 3 points, 2 or 3 stanzas. So same in Ecclesiastes. As you go through that, he uses a lot of poetry throughout the book, but you have to identify, okay, which the major sections of each of those. It's the same in Proverbs, by the way, Proverbs 1 through 9. Those are 9 distinct, basically 9 distinct wisdom poems. Each chapter represents one particular topic or focus. Okay, so, but there's a flow of thought, actually. I don't know if you guys have thought about this in Proverbs. Proverbs 10 to 29 are those short aphorisms, those 2-line proverbs, and they're somewhat disconnected. But Proverbs 1 through 9 are actually 9 wisdom poems that are placed in the beginning. So each chapter represents a self-contained or a section, a poem within. So you'll have within, like, for example, chapter 5, that's a poem that's focused upon the issue of adultery. And in Proverbs chapter, what is it, 4, the focus there is on God as being our satisfaction. And so chapter 2, the focus is on wisdom, the need for wisdom. And so each of those first 9 chapters represent a full wisdom poem, and then within that poem there's, you know, the stanzas, just like we have in a psalm. Okay, so Ecclesiastes, you know, Job, Song of Solomon, that's considered wisdom literature, but it's poetic, and there you break it down by it's a dialogue between Solomon and his bride. At least that's one view. And so you would break it down by what each one says. Okay, does that make sense, Jason?
Thank you, Pastor.
Okay. All right. Any final questions? Okay. Well, I know we covered a lot. We kind of went deep there in a few places, but the intent of these workshops is I really just want to expose you to more than what we would see together in class, just so you see it and are exposed to it. Hopefully that will give a better understanding of you know, why certain things are, especially why translations do what they do. Something, I just lost what I was going to say. So that's kind of what I want to also do, is I'll walk you through each of the steps of the exegetical process, but along the way, just I want to maybe expand on some things just to you know, give you some exposure to some other aspects of exegesis. Okay, so hope that's helpful. I don't see anybody sleeping, so that's good. I'm always glad for that. If I could get Joshua, if you would not mind, could you please close us in prayer?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Let's pray. Dear gracious and heavenly Father, we're thankful for this time to be able to learn with Pastor Tim. Thank you, Lord, for his heart, and we pray, oh God, that you will continually bless him. And at the same time, for each and every one of my brothers in Christ who are serving, for each and every one of us, Lord, I pray that may your grace be continually be upon us. May you provide for our needs. And at the same time, Lord, strengthen us for the days to come. Lord, be with us throughout the whole day, throughout this week, oh God, and throughout this time of crisis. May you minister to us, may you speak to us, and remind us of the goodness that we have received through Christ Jesus our Lord. And we thank you, Lord, for this time of learning. And whatever we have learned, oh God, we pray may we apply it in our lives. May we apply it to our congregation as well. And we give you